let's jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the totally classified, incredibly dark history of global bioterrorism. We are tracing a devastating century of forced human evolution to break down one of the most complex webs of corporate greed, viral outbreaks, and apocalyptic ambitions ever recorded.
We've broken down this massive, century-long historical record into 6 distinct chronological eras. We'll start with the ancient roots, shift into the rise of Umbrella, dig into the 1998 catastrophes, track global bioterrorism, look at the modern era, and wrap it all up with Resident Evil Requiem.
All right, Section 1, the ancient roots, spanning from 1919 to the 1950s.
To understand this modern biological nightmare, we actually have to rewind over 100 years. It all starts, surprisingly, with a grieving mother's desperate search for a cure. Back in 1919, the Spanish flu tragically took the life of a young girl named Eva. Her mother, Miranda, was just entirely overcome with grief and ended up wandering into a mountain cave. Now fast forward a bit to the early 1950s, Miranda ends up rescuing a lost backpacker, a guy named Oswell E. Spencer. She shares her miraculous biological discoveries with him, and boom, that sparks an idea that would literally change the world.
So what did she find in that cave? Well, it was the megamycete. This was the absolute foundation of the biological terror we're talking about today. When Miranda touched this ancient, microscopic fungal network, she realized it was essentially a living archive of the dead. It literally absorbed the memories and consciousness of anyone buried in the soil above it, including, of course, her daughter. Believing she could actually use this organism to resurrect her child, Miranda basically set up a bizarre cult of personality in her village just so she could conduct her experiments.
Moving right along to Section 2, the rise of Umbrella, covering the 1960s through the 1980s.
This is the era where supernatural grief morphs into straight-up corporate, weaponized biology on a massive scale. By the mid-20th century, Oswell E. Spencer takes what he learned from Miranda, mixes it with some new discoveries, and founds the Umbrella Corporation. But, it was just a pharmaceutical front for illegal bioorganic weapons research. He builds this sprawling Arclay research facility hidden right underneath an ornate mansion in the American Midwest. And by the late 70s, he hands the keys to this underground empire to two absolute child prodigies, Albert Wesker and William Birkin. Now, the real game-changer here is the Progenitor virus. Spencer and his colleagues actually derived this from a rare African flower known as the stairway to the sun. This virus was the raw material, the biological baseline for literally everything that followed. It gave Spencer the key to genetically altering organisms, which he used to launch this incredibly cruel eugenics program known as the Wesker Project.
You really have to understand the God complex driving this guy. Spencer believed humans were at an evolutionary dead end and needed forced evolution by eliminating the weak. That terrifying philosophy drove Umbrella to literally kidnap and indoctrinate highly intelligent children to create a superior human race. He actually funded foster homes specifically to use these kids as test subjects. It's wild because it shows how one man's sheer arrogance and fear of death engineered a global crisis. And the only successful survivor of this brutal indoctrination? Yeah, that would be Albert Wesker himself.
Okay, Section 3, the 1998 catastrophes, focusing on Arclay and Raccoon City.
Decades of this secret, unchecked corporate experimentation inevitably led to an explosive breaking point. Let's look closely at the hour-by-hour collapse in July 1998. It's like a horror movie playing out in real time. Local authorities completely ignore initial reports of cannibalism in the mountains. So when the police finally send their elite STARS teams into the woods, it is not a rescue mission. It's a live-fire calibration test. Their own compromised captain, Albert Wesker, deliberately seals his team, including operatives like Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, inside the Spencer Mansion, a literal Victorian death trap, just to gather combat data on Umbrella's biological assets. And speaking of those assets, the sheer variety of Umbrella's research is absolutely staggering. They had fragmented into these highly specialized, devastating weapons. You've got the T virus, which basically reanimates dead tissue and destroys higher brain function, your classic shuffling undead. Then there's the G virus, created by William Birkin, which causes rapid, totally unpredictable mutations. And the Nemesis parasite? That one actually hijacks the nervous system so the host can follow complex tactical orders. With all these catastrophic weapons, containment was virtually impossible.
Which brings us to the horrific fallout. Because of institutional denial and massive corporate cover-ups, the infection bled straight from the mansion directly into Raccoon City.
The local government's failure to act led to a catastrophic urban outbreak, which ultimately ended with a government missile strike leveling the town. Over 100,000 citizens lost their lives. Raccoon City was reduced to a smoking crater, marking a brutal end to Umbrella's golden age.
Let's turn to Section 4, Global Bioterrorism in the 2000s. The destruction of Raccoon City might have bankrupted Umbrella, but it also flooded the global black market with their bioweapons. And here's where we see a fascinating clash of agendas. Remember Wesker? Well, he usurps his creator's God complex. In 2006, he tracks down an elderly Spencer, who reveals that Wesker's entire life was programmed just to serve him. So, in the ultimate hostile takeover, Wesker kills Spencer on the spot. He decides that he is the one meant to be a god, taking Spencer's vision of forced evolution to a terrifying new extreme.
Wesker's horrific plan culminated in 2009 with the B.O.W.s virus. This was a literal doomsday pathogen engineered to violently tear apart inferior genes while granting extreme superhuman abilities to the genetic elite. His master plan? Load this pathogen into stealth bombers, release it into the atmosphere, and let global wind currents infect the entire planet. The unworthy would mutate and die, while a tiny percentage of the elite would survive. Thankfully, this apocalyptic plot was narrowly thwarted in an active African volcano by Chris Redfield, permanently ending Wesker's life.
Section 5, the modern era, running from 2017 to 2021.
Even with Wesker gone, the timeline loops right back to its ancient fungal roots. This century of trauma ends up pulling an ordinary guy named Ethan Winters into a deeply entrenched plot. In 2017, Ethan travels to a derelict plantation in Louisiana, searching for his missing wife, only to find the entire Baker family totally warped by a biological weapon. A few years later, in 2021, Ethan's daughter Rose is targeted by none other than Mother Miranda herself. She had resurfaced to use the child as a vessel to finally resurrect her long-dead daughter Ava.
Now, here is the absolute key takeaway. The biological nightmare Ethan faced in Louisiana, it was directly tied to Mother Miranda's 1919 discovery. A syndicate known as the Connections had secretly worked with Miranda to refine her ancient megamycete into what they simply called the mold. So you see, it wasn't some brand new threat at all. It was a highly weaponized, modern continuation of the exact same horror that began in that Eastern European cave over a century ago.
And that brings us to Section 6, Resident Evil Requiem, set in 2026. Decades after surviving the 1998 catastrophes, the ghosts of Raccoon City resurface for one final struggle. Veteran operative Leon S. Kennedy finds himself in a desperate race against time as his own body begins to succumb to a dormant infection. You see, Leon was part of a rare 10% of the population immune to the immediate zombie-inducing effects of the T-virus during the Raccoon City outbreak. But now, almost 30 years later, the long-term biological toll is catching up to him. This forces him to hunt down a new threat at the Wrenwood Hotel just to save his own life. And this hunt unlocks the ultimate betrayal of the entire timeline. The truth about Raccoon City's fall? It wasn't destroyed just to stop an infection. No, it was destroyed to facilitate the theft of a cure that could have saved them all. The Connections secretly orchestrated that 1998 missile strike as a distraction to steal Umbrella's ultimate asset, Project B.O.W.s. Everyone thought it was a doomsday weapon, but when a woman named Grace Ashgrad finally unlocks it in 2026, the truth is staggering. B.O.W.s isn't a weapon at all. It's a universal vaccine capable of destroying all viruses.
So, we leave you with this final thought. From Mother Miranda's grief in 1919, to Spencer's terrifying God complex, to Wesker's doomsday plans, the real virus was always human arrogance. As the B.O.W.s vaccine finally promises to erase a century of biological nightmares, we have to ask, even if we can cure the biology, will humanity's arrogant desire to play God ever truly be extinguished? Thanks for hanging out with us for this explainer, and remember to always question the science behind the shadows.